Hello and welcome back to another track breakdown. My name is Caleb Bonnet, also known as Zero Tep, and this is a track that was requested by a few people. A song that I made called Take Your Sweet Sweet Music and Shove It Up Your Ass. I call it Sweet Music for short, and it's one of my favorite songs of the last couple of years, and it's really simple, which is why I'm really excited to show it to you. And it's actually kind of like a Frankenstein of a track in a lot of ways, because it was built on the back of a remix of an old Junkie XL song. He was one of those guys that I got into when I first started making electronic music. And he had this album of like electroclash songs called Boomin' Back At You. And I wanted to remix the title track. And it ended up just kind of like developing into its own thing. And actually incorporating elements of another track that I was working on, and a couple of other things I'm not even sure I remember. But let's take a listen to the first bit of it, and then we'll get into it. So as you can see, it's a lot of the same sort of like repetitious things. It's made for DJs. Let's take a look at the intro first, and some of these sounds that I built up. As I've said before, I don't sample a lot. I tend to sample a lot of percussion when I do, just because I don't have a drum kit. I don't have space for a drum kit. So live percussion and breaks end up being something that I sample a bit. But here I started by recording some of my maracas. I'm pretty sure they're maracas. They might be my shaker. And chopping up some breaks and mixing them with some various like percussion and what I called floaties, just sort of like these like resampled, I think they're modular recordings that have kind of been echoed out. So let's start by taking a look at like the maracas. I tend to filter out my like upper percussion a little bit and give it a little bit of space. Here it's just being given a little bit of room reverb. Some frequency shifting, excuse me, some frequency shifting, like my voice, in the very beginning, because then it comes down, let me show you that, into this second part of the intro that gains the break. So the timbre of the maracas kind of change because of the frequency shifter. And then there's some chorus to kind of give it some stereo width, as well as some auto pan stereo width again, just to kind of not place it in the stereo spectrum. The break chops here are pretty self-explanatory. Just took some breaks and I chopped them up. Gave them a little bit of space. In the beginning here, I think it's just some 100% dry hall reverb to make it sound like an intro. I'm not sure what's on this one. Oh, just that's the dry one. Added in a shaker loop here in the second half of the intro. Again, gave it some space and a little bit of like stereo movement. It's not crazy, it's just chopped up in time. The 808 here is just kind of like a laugh, I guess. Just a dry 808 kit, adding some percussion in the background, mostly like those toms. And those hi-hats. This noise here is developed in Trash, so let's see. Yeah, and dry it doesn't sound quite as impressive. It just comes from some jamming I was doing on Granulator, I'm pretty sure. Granular synthesis. Sound-wise, I tend to look more structurally. So if there's, you know, I saw those transients and all of those like weird undulating midtones, and I said I can distort that. So yeah, with all of the added bits, there's this fuzz that kind of warms it up a little bit, increases the volume, and then this really destructive plateau element that gives it all of that added white noise on top. So yeah, you can tell the difference is really stark. Then these floaties. There's this little sound that you wouldn't guess is actually an AK-47 being, I think it's the magazine being pulled out. And it's reversed. And then yeah, nice little break here. I think it's literally called nice break with pitch change. Yeah. Just being repeated. And that becomes a part of the motif on the breaks in the intro and outro. But really, it's that play between like, what is that? 3 different breaks there, and a whole bunch of extra percussion that makes it kind of interesting. I wanted the intro to be deliberately underwhelming for this because the drop is so ridiculously overwhelming. So let's get into the drop, and I'm going to reveal to you the secret behind the structure of this song. Actually comes directly from this Junkie XL song. And there's even a little bit of it blended in there, kind of as an homage. I didn't want to use it just dryly. Here's the bass is mostly built out of this subsample that I recorded with No Other Boy. One time, I think we were just messing around in Reactor and got some bass sounds out of it. Let me turn all of this crap off so you can hear that. So yeah, it's basically just a straight tone. And what I did to give it some movement is I filtered it out on the low end, and gave it a little bit of movement in the LFO. So this LFO is tied to the frequency here of the auto filter. A little bit of space with the reverb, just to kind of give it some stereo width. And what is this frequency shifter doing? Yeah, it's what I'm using at the very end. Those screechy bits are basically the frequency shifter being turned up a little bit. And since all of this bass is being distorted to absolute, like, just being absolutely distorted by Trash here, I can kind of play with it and take some liberties just in the tracks. So without the Trash on it, it sounds like this. It's so unbelievably underwhelming. And that's kind of like the secret of this song is in this sound design, this distortion. So on this end of Trash, I'm actually just running with the vanilla chain Trash into Convolve into Dynamics. Trash here, giving it some warmth and a little bit of fuzz distortion, mostly in that sub bass with the straight setting here. And it's not very wet. It's this this heavy hard limits that really gives it the kick. And again, I'm giving this a lot of drive to just absolutely destroy those harmonics. And this auto filter is basically the entire wobble. This is the whole wobble of the bottom end. And it's being done just like a traditional dubstep wobble, where it's being modulated essentially. And it's not fancy, but because I'm playing with this rate and kind of like giving it some different kind of playing with the resonance and things like that, it becomes a lead on its own. I didn't really want a lead in this. It's the bass. So my songs tend to be simple and they tend to groove like that because when I find a sound that I like, I just stick with it and I like to play with it and explore it. Let's look at the drum rack real quick. The drum rack is extremely simple. I think it was taken from another song I was working on, collaboration. I'm not entirely sure with who. That I just like the drum rack from better than anything else, and I wanted to keep it. It's pretty simple. It's essentially like just well-tuned hits with some saturation on the end. I didn't even want to give it any real reverb because I thought that the tight drum kit, that real dry drum kit, sounded really good. So you've got your kick. That actually does have some reverb on it. Really dry snares. Extremely dry hi-hats. And then this live hi-hat, which I've actually like warped out a little bit to make it sound a bit glitchy. And that's I use that on the snare and on the kick sometimes, just to give it like a high-end crunch. It's a good technique for getting some aggression on each of your hits. So you'll notice it's only triggering on that first snare to kind of like give it a little bit of an extra push. So this break here is pretty much ripped entirely from that Boom and Back at You song. In fact, I even sampled it a little. You can tell it's turned down way in the background just to add sort of a layer behind it. That's actually from the original song. And then I just added some wavetable on top of it to kind of like give it, yeah, some extra layers. Somebody's playing music in the background. This noise in the sort of like breaks comes from just a long string of, I'm pretty sure, granular experiments I was working on, and it just kind of sounds like this in whole. I'm not entirely sure where the sounds for this came from, but I'm gonna guess that it's like a modular recording with some fairly like tight transients that I could loop back up and that would sound sharp when they came back through on granular synthesis. It just comes down to how you experiment with it and how you utilize it in your final mix. Because this is, I wouldn't even really call it a particularly clever use of this kind of like destructive noise, but you know, clearly it's well used before the drop, because the drop is just so unceremonious. There's no crash, there's no anything, just this hard kick coming out of that noise. if I had the drum rack turned on. Yeah, you can see it's really not a complicated track. It was just sort of the perfect storm of things and some good ideas that came together. The bulk of these sort of filler sounds are not complicated. If you have, some maracas or a shaker, or you have some nice loops, there's some loops that come with Ableton Suite that are great, then you can construct something like this out of essentially like stock sounds. It's really wonderful. I think the big player here, of course, is iZotope's Trash. But you can get similar sounds, and I have gotten similar sounds before, using things like the filter delay in Ableton, the frequency shifter, which I actually use to pretty good effect at the end here to make it sound all screechy. That upper frequency there, you can hear it trailing off, is almost entirely the frequency shifter. But yeah, and you can get similar sounds with amp and cabinet. They're very, very powerful effects. And now on top of that, Ableton's pedal has some really, really cool fuzz effects that are really useful. And I think that this sort of chaining here on your bass is also very powerful. It's something that a lot of people already do, where I've got the sub essentially running through totally dry below 100 hertz, and then I'm doing all of my effecting up on the high end. And then, of course, because I want my sounds to kind of fit together, I'm putting a little bit of overdrive on the end to warm it up. These effects at the end, these granular riser effects and things like that, are mostly made using Granulator 2 in Ableton, which is a Max for Live patch that's actually free to download if you own Live Suite. And I highly recommend that for sound design. This is it. Honestly, this track is not extremely complex. It's mostly just a perfect storm of simple sounds, inspired by some of those bass guys that keep things simple. It's very heavy on the percussion sounds, for sure, and very heavy on iZotope's Trash. This is definitely one of those that I would have bashed out in probably a day or two and then gone back and edited later. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed that breakdown, make sure to subscribe for more. I'm now doing some live beat sessions on Twitch as well, every now and then. And I will see you guys next time.